catcher?
Yeah, well, there's a story. There's a story today. It's actually put out. I think it's at Raiders News Update today. It's talking about farmers who will be able to control their herds in the field. They'll implant them with chips, but these farmers will be able to wear these headsets or whatever. They'll be able to communicate through speaking certain words or thinking certain thoughts, and be able to control the cattle to make them to come in when they want them to come in. This is real technology. It's not sci-fi. It's real technology. It's extraordinary, but it's also prophetic. In other words, it's not just something to be viewed as Ezekiel having talked about it, thousands of years ago. The incarnating or bringing back the spirits of giants and flesh on earth is something that is scientifically or theoretically, and maybe more important to our most ardent Christian listeners, prophetically possible. And I think it would shock a lot of people to know that it's actually confirmed as a real possibility, that is, the coming back of these giants, by one of the greatest Hebrew prophets of all time, Isaiah, in that he pinpointed, and you know that I'm very familiar with this portion of text, he pinpointed this as happening, but not just at some obscure moment in time. He pinpointed it as happening when Babylon is invaded in the end times, and after that destroyed. He ties the time frame to when a mystical gate is going to be opened in Babylon, and the offspring of these watchers are going to come back through. The offspring, the giants, are going to come back. And I talked a little bit about this on Coast to Coast the other night with George Norrie and had different callers about it. There's something that's unusual to me. How that the Hebrew prophet actually supports Amorite theology. Now, I think Amorites simply stole this knowledge, if you will. They borrowed from the original revelation from God to man. And we've talked about that before, so I don't want to go into that whole thing. But Isaiah is telling us that this one rendition, if you will, in Amorite theology is accurate, in that in Isaiah 14 he describes how the Rapha, or the Rephaim, which is an Amorite term, how that they are in the underworld, the chief ones of the inner earth, and the kings of the thrones of the earth of the false god, Baal, who warred against God. He talks about how these can come back from the dead, or how they can come back from wherever it is they are. And what's incredible to me about this text is because these passages tell us something about what was believed with regard to what the offspring of the watchers of the gods can do under certain circumstances. The word Rephaim is an Amorite term that carried with it the meaning to be resurrected or reintroduced.
Reanimated, too.
Reanimated.
Right. And again, the Rephaim is interesting because, again, you've got the same I am and Nephilim, and you've got this tie there, Tom, just by the word or the linguistics of it. But and by the way, in the Old Testament, as you know, the word the dead is really the Rephaim, 8 times?
Right.
When it said, shall the dead rise to praise thee in the Psalms, that's talking about the Rephaim. And it also ties in with Ezekiel, good night, 28, the king of Tyre. So continue on, because forgive me, but this is like steak to a meat eater, okay?
Well,
I'm like salivating Steve on this stuff.
Well, you're certainly more the expert, Steve, than I am. What I know, I'm a researcher, and what I know is that from the Rosh Shamra text, the Amorite text, that the Rephaim are described as having been before death both human and divine beings.
Right. In other words, Gilgamesh's crew.
That's right. And they worshiped this Amorite god Baal, who was the ruler of the underworld. But when they died, they would go down into the underworld, and there they were known as the assembly of kings or gods, rulers, heroes, just as is described by Isaiah. But the kicker is that these beings had the ability, given the right technology or the right body, to return from that place through reanimation, reincarnation, reembodiment, whatever you will. And what's extraordinary is that when they came back into their bodies, the Amorites described them in the same word, Nephilim. That's what they were. On earth, they were known as Nephilim. And some people believe that this might explain how the Nephilim existed on earth both before and after the flood, because they have the ability under the right circumstances to come back. Now imagine, Steve, the startling proposition of those texts, these predictions that the Nephilim, the giants, the mighty men of old, the gods, the offspring of the Watchers, their children, that under the right circumstances, they can come back. They can be reanimated. They can be resurrected. In fact, part of the meaning of the word Rephaim means to be healed from death. It might also surprise some people to know that I believe that one of the greatest legends in history, the actual Sumerian story of Gilgamesh, or the Hebrew story of Nimrod, and interestingly how all of that is tied to Iran and Iraq and the Babylonian Stargate and the Tower of Babel. How that in Isaiah 13 he talks about how all of that in the end times, following the invasion and then the destruction of Babylon, there is going to be a return upon the Gibborim on earth. Folks, we're talking about something that's happening right now. At the same time that you have biotechnology repeating what the Watchers did, at the same time the largest U.S. embassy and military presence in Babylon, who had a first on-the-ground significant interest in the location of the ancient location of the Tower of Babel, how that in that very same location, Isaiah tells us that at the end of time, that when that is invaded and then ultimately something happens there in which it's completely destroyed, nuclear fallout or some other biological catastrophe, something occurs there, that a gate there, the Stargate, is going to open, and through it is going to return these giants upon earth. I believe, Steve, what might be an actual record of one of the Rephaim having done this is important to understand. Something that came back to life, if you will, that walked upon the earth in a body, and of course I'm referring to Nimrod, who some scholars also identify as Gilgamesh, which we've been talking about. And you did such an extraordinary job in your book on the giants talking about, and since then also have, talking about Gilgamesh, this giant who people didn't even believe existed until his grave marker was found, and then according to intelligence that you and I both have, the military, they were there within hours. Within hours.
And why would the military
presence around this archaeological dig, and they removed stuff from there. We don't know yet what they removed, but I mean, having found the grave marker of Gilgamesh gives me some idea about what they removed.
Right, I can tell you this. The ancient technology, but also Gilgamesh held some of the information, because it's not enough to have the technology, I've been told. You have to know, in essence, you have to have their instructions.